The Outcast and the Newcomer. The crystalline spires of Luminous City glimmered in the light of three setting suns, casting prismatic shadows across the bustling streets. Among the diverse crowd of alien species, one figure stood out, not for her appearance, but for the wide berth others gave her as she passed. Zara, a Luminian with iridescent skin and eyes that shimmered like opals, walked with her head held high, ignoring the fearful glances and whispered conversations that followed in her wake. At her side prowled a creature that seemed to be made of living shadow, its form shifting and undulating with each step. This was Umbra, Zara's constant companion and the source of her isolation. As a child, Zara had discovered Umbra in the depths of the crystal caverns beneath Luminous City. The shadow creature had been injured, separated from its kind. Against all warnings and superstitions, Zara had nursed it back to health. From that day forward, Umbra had refused to leave her side, forming a bond that both blessed and cursed the young Luminian. Umbra was fiercely protective, and rumors spread quickly of its ability to manipulate shadows and strike fear into the hearts of those who threatened Zara. While she saw a loyal friend, others saw only a monster. Zara's own people, the Luminians, prided themselves on their affinity for light and crystal technology. Umbra's very existence challenged their worldview, and so Zara found herself an outcast in her own society. As Zara made her way through the market district, a commotion near the spaceport caught her attention. A sleek ship, unlike any she had seen before, was touching down on the crystalline landing pad. The crowd's fearful whispers shifted to excited murmurs. "It's them, the humans. I heard they can adapt to any environment. They say humans are unpredictable, dangerous even." Zara's curiosity piqued. She had heard stories of humans, of course, a species that had rapidly expanded across the galaxy, forming alliances and mediating conflicts wherever they went. But Lumina had remained isolated, wary of outsiders, until now. The ship's ramp extended, and a single figure emerged. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and a confident stride. His skin was a warm brown, his hair a mass of dark curls, and his eyes, a striking green that seemed to take in everything at once. As the human descended the ramp, Zara noticed something odd. While the Luminians kept their distance, eyeing the newcomer with a mixture of fascination and wariness, the human's gaze was drawn immediately to her, and more surprisingly, to Umbra. Instead of fear, his eyes lit up with undisguised interest. The human made his way through the crowd, nodding politely to the Luminian officials who rushed to greet him. But his path was clear. He was heading straight for Zara. Umbra tensed at her side, its shadowy form rippling with protective energy. Zara placed a calming hand on her companion, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The human stopped a respectful distance away, his green eyes moving from Zara to Umbra and back again. Then, to her utter astonishment, he smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Hello," he said, his voice carrying an accent Zara had never heard before. "I'm Jack Carter, diplomatic envoy from Earth. And who might you two be?" Zara blinked, taken aback by his direct approach and the fact that he had addressed both her and Umbra as individuals. I'm Zara," she managed, her voice soft but clear. "And this is Umbra." Jack's smile widened. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. I hope you don't mind my forwardness, but I couldn't help noticing your fascinating companion. I've never seen anything quite like Umbra before." Before Zara could respond, one of the Luminian officials hurried over, his crystalline skin flushed with embarrassment. "Ambassador Carter, please allow me to introduce you to our city's leaders. You needn't concern yourself with." The official trailed off, shooting a disapproving glance at Zara and Umbra. Jack's expression cooled slightly as he turned to the official. "Thank you, but I believe I was in the middle of a conversation with Zara and Umbra. Perhaps we could continue the introductions in a moment." The official sputtered, clearly unused to being dismissed. Jack turned back to Zara, his warm smile returning. I apologize for the interruption, you were saying. Zara felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, surprise, and something else she couldn't quite name. For the first time in years, someone was looking at her and Umbra without fear or judgment. Umbra is unique, Zara said, finding her voice. I found him when I was young. We've been together ever since. Jack nodded, his eyes alight with genuine interest. Fascinating. And clearly intelligent. The bond between you is almost palpable. Umbra, who had remained tense throughout the exchange, slowly relaxed. A tendril of shadow extended towards Jack, not threatening, but curious. Jack, to Zara's amazement, didn't flinch. He slowly extended his hand, palm up, allowing Umbra to investigate. The shadow tendril brushed against his skin, and Jack let out a soft laugh. That tickles, he said, grinning at Umbra. It's an honor to meet you too. Zara felt a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying start to lift. For years, she had faced fear, suspicion, and isolation. But this human, this Jack Carter, looked at her and Umbra with nothing but open curiosity and warmth. Ambassador Carter, the Luminian official interrupted again, more insistently this time. The welcome ceremony is about to begin. We really must be going. Jack sighed, looking genuinely disappointed. Duty calls, I'm afraid. But Zara, Umbra, I very much hope we'll have the chance to talk again soon. There's so much I'd like to learn about both of you, if you're willing to share. Zara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Jack gave them one last warm smile before allowing himself to be led away by the flustered officials. As he walked away, Zara felt Umbra press against her leg. She looked down at her companion, seeing her own mix of emotions reflected in its swirling, shadowy form. I know, she said softly. I've never met anyone like him either. For the first time in years, Zara felt a spark of hope. Perhaps with the arrival of this unusual human, things on Lumina were about to change. And just maybe, she and Umbra would no longer have to face the world alone. As the crowd dispersed, following Jack and the officials towards the city center, Zara and Umbra remained behind. The market district, usually bustling at this hour, was oddly quiet. It was as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting to see what changes this human ambassador might bring. Zara found herself replaying the brief encounter in her mind. Jack's easy smile, the way he had addressed Umbra as an equal, the genuine interest in his eyes. It was all so different from what she had grown accustomed to. What do you think, Umbra? She asked softly, knowing her companion could sense her thoughts and emotions. Should we trust him? Umbra's form rippled, tendrils of shadow weaving intricate patterns in the air. It was neither a yes nor a no, but rather a sense of cautious optimism. Zara understood perfectly. Hope was a dangerous thing for outcasts like them, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel it. As they made their way home, Zara noticed the usual fearful glances were now mixed with something new, curiosity. Word of her interaction with the human ambassador had clearly spread quickly. She overheard snippets of conversation as she passed. Did you see? The human talked to her. And that thing. He wasn't afraid at all. What if we've been wrong about them? Zara kept her head high, but inside, her mind was racing. Could Jack's arrival really change things, or would it only lead to more disappointment? As they reached the outskirts of the city, where the crystal spires gave way to more modest dwellings, Zara and Umbra arrived at their home, a small, isolated structure nestled against the base of a towering cliff. It wasn't much, but it was a sanctuary away from the fearful eyes of the city. Zara paused at the entrance, looking back at the glittering skyline of Lumina City. Somewhere in there, Jack Carter was being welcomed by the city's elite. What was he thinking? Would he remember his brief encounter with the outcast and her shadow companion? With a small sigh, Zara entered her home, Umbra flowing in beside her. As the door closed behind them, she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, Everything was about to change. Unraveling mysteries. Days passed, and life in Luminous City seemed to return to its normal rhythm. Almost. The arrival of the human ambassador had stirred up a quiet undercurrent of change that Zara could feel every time she ventured into the city. Jack Carter had been making waves, not content to simply attend formal functions and engage in polite diplomacy. Reports filtered through the city of the human asking probing questions, visiting every district, and speaking to Luminians from all walks of life. Zara heard whispers that he had been asking about her and Umbra, but she dismissed them as mere gossip. Surely a diplomatic envoy had more important matters to attend to than satisfying his curiosity about an outcast and her unusual companion. It was on the 5th day after Jack's arrival that Zara's routine was interrupted. She was tending to her small garden of bioluminescent plants, a hobby that connected her to her people's affinity for light, even as she lived in the shadows, when a familiar voice called out, "Zara, Umbra, are you home?" She froze, hardly daring to believe her ears. Umbra, who had been basking in a patch of sunlight, immediately flowed to her side, alert but not aggressive. Zara made her way to the front of the house, her heart pounding. There, standing at the edge of her property with an uncertain smile, was Jack Carter. "Ambassador Carter," Zara said, surprise evident in her voice. "What brings you all the way out here?" Jack's smile widened, relief clear on his face. "Please, call me Jack, and I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I've been hoping to speak with you both again. May I come in?" Zara hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping aside to allow Jack to enter. As he passed, Umbra reached out a tendril, brushing against Jack's hand in what seemed almost like a greeting. "It's good to see you too, Umbra," Jack said warmly, and Zara felt a now familiar surge of amazement at his easy acceptance of her companion. Once inside, Jack looked around with undisguised interest. Zara felt a flash of self-consciousness. Her home was modest by Luminian standards, filled with an eclectic mix of items she had collected over the years. Crystals shared space with shadow-infused artifacts, a physical representation of the duality in her life. "You have a lovely home," Jack said, and the sincerity in his voice eased some of Zara's tension. "Thank you for allowing me to visit." Zara gestured for Jack to sit in one of the chairs near the window, while she perched on the edge of another. Umbra flowed around her feet, attentive but relaxed. "I must admit, I'm surprised to see you here," Zara said. "Surely you have more important matters to attend to than visiting outcasts." Jack's expression grew serious. "Actually, Zara, that's part of why I'm here. In my time on Lumina, I've been trying to understand your society, its strengths and its challenges, and I keep coming back to you and Umbra." Zara felt a flicker of unease. "What do you mean?" Jack leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "The way your people react to Umbra, the isolation you face, it seems to represent a larger issue within Luminian society, a fear of the unknown, a rejection of anything that doesn't fit into predetermined categories. Am I wrong?" Zara was silent for a long moment, struggling with how to respond. Finally, she said, "You're not wrong. But it's more complicated than that. Luminians have always valued light, structure, clarity. Umbra represents everything that challenges those values. And yet," Jack said softly, "Umbra is as much a part of this world as the crystals your people revere, perhaps even more so, being a native life form." Zara blinked, surprised by this perspective. I've never thought of it quite like that." Jack smiled. "Sometimes it takes an outsider's eyes to see things differently. But Zara, I'm not just here out of curiosity or some abstract desire to understand your society. I'm here because I believe you and Umbra might be key to preventing a disaster." Zara felt Umbra tense at her feet, responding to her sudden spike of anxiety. "What do you mean? What disaster?" Jack took a deep breath. "In my investigations, I've discovered that the crystal mines beneath Luminous City are dangerously unstable. The constant excavation, the disregard for the natural balance of the caverns, It's all leading to a potential collapse that could devastate the city. Zara gasped. But that's impossible. The mines are our lifeblood, the source of our technology, our power. Surely someone would have noticed. Someone did notice, Jack interrupted gently. You did, Zara. Or rather, Umbra did. Zara fell silent, her mind racing. Memories flooded back. Umbra's increasing agitation whenever they neared the mines, the subtle tremors she had felt but dismissed, the way the shadows seemed to writhe in warning. How did you know? She whispered. Jack's eyes were filled with compassion. I've been studying everything I can about Luminian history and biology. The more I learned, the more I became convinced that creatures like Umbra once played a crucial role in maintaining the balance of this world. They're not monsters or anomalies. They're an essential part of the ecosystem, and I believe they can sense things that Luminians, with all their advanced technology, have become blind to. Zara looked down at Umbra, who gazed back at her with swirling, enigmatic eyes. All this time, she murmured, "You've been trying to warn me, haven't you?" Umbra's form rippled in affirmation, and Zara felt a wave of emotion wash over her, love for her loyal companion, regret for not understanding sooner, and a growing sense of purpose. She looked back at Jack, her opalescent eyes shimmering with determination. What can we do? How can we make them listen? Jack's answering smile was both grim and hopeful. That's where it gets complicated. The Luminian officials I've spoken to are dismissive of my concerns. They're so confident in their technology, in their understanding of the crystals, that they can't see the danger. But I believe that if we can demonstrate Umbra's abilities, if we can show them the truth that they've been blind to, we might have a chance. Zara stood, pacing the small room as she processed this information. Umbra flowed alongside her, a comforting presence. But how? They feared and shunned Umbra for so long. Why would they listen now? Jack watched her, his green eyes thoughtful. Because they'll have to. Zara, I think we need to go into the mines. We need to gather evidence that even the most skeptical Luminian can't ignore, and we need Umbra's unique senses to guide us. Zara stopped pacing, turning to face Jack with a mix of fear and resolve. The mines are restricted, heavily guarded. How would we even get in? A mischievous glint appeared in Jack's eyes. Well, that's where being a diplomatic envoy comes in handy. I've arranged for a tour of the mines tomorrow. Official business, very hush-hush. They're not thrilled about it, but they can't exactly refuse. And you want us to come with you, Zara said, realization dawning. Jack nodded. Exactly. Your knowledge of Luminian culture combined with Umbra's abilities. It's our best chance of understanding what's really going on down there. Zara felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. The mines were the heart of Luminian society, a place she had never been allowed to enter. To go there, to potentially challenge everything her people believed about their world, it was a daunting prospect. But as she looked at Umbra, seeing the quiet strength in its shadowy form, and then at Jack, with his unwavering belief in them, Zara felt something else growing within her. Courage, purpose, hope. All right, she said, her voice steady. We'll do it. But Jack, you have to understand. If we're seen together, if people realize you're associating with me and Umbra, it could damage your position here. Are you sure you want to take that risk? Jack's expression softened, and he stepped closer to Zara. Some things are worth the risk, he said quietly. I believe in what we're doing, Zara. I believe in you and Umbra. Whatever consequences come, we'll face them together. The intensity in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, it stirred something in Zara that she had long thought dormant. A warmth spread through her, and she found herself smiling back at him. Together, then, she agreed. As Jack prepared to leave, going over the details of their plan for the next day, Zara felt a shift in the air around her. It was as if the path of her life, long confined to the shadows, was suddenly opening up before her. Whatever happened in the mines tomorrow, She knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Crisis and revelation. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the three sons of Lumina casting a dazzling array of colors across the crystalline landscape. But for Zara, waking in the pre-dawn darkness with Umbra curled protectively around her, the beauty of the day was overshadowed by the weight of what lay ahead. As she prepared herself, donning the protective gear Jack had secretly provided, Zara couldn't shake a feeling of unreality. After years of isolation, of being shunned and feared, she was about to enter the very heart of Luminian society, and potentially change it forever. Umbra sensed her anxiety, flowing around her in soothing patterns. Zara took a deep breath, drawing strength from her faithful companion. "We can do this," she murmured, as much to herself as to Umbra. "We have to." They made their way to the agreed meeting point, a quiet corner near the entrance to the mining complex. Jack was already there, his human features standing out among the crystalline architecture. When he saw Zara and Umbra approach, his face lit up with a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through Zara's chest. "Ready?" Jack asked, his voice low and encouraging. Zara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Together, they approached the mine entrance, where a group of Luminian officials waited with poorly concealed impatience. The lead official, a tall Luminian with elaborately faceted skin, frowned as he saw Zara and Umbra. "Ambassador Carter," he said, his tone clipped, "I was under the impression this was to be a private tour." Jack's diplomatic smile never wavered. "Oh, but it is, Counselor Vex. Zara is a special consultant I've brought in for her unique expertise. I assure you, her presence is essential to our discussions about potential cooperation between our worlds." Counselor Vex's frown deepened, his gaze flicking nervously to Umbra. "And that creature? An invaluable assistant," Jack said smoothly. "I'm sure you understand the need for thorough investigation in matters of such importance." For a moment, Zara thought Vex might refuse them entry. But eventually, he gave a curt nod. "Very well. But you are responsible for them. Ambassador, any disruption, any breach of security, and this tour ends immediately." "Understood." "Perfectly," Jack agreed, and with that, they were ushered into the mines. The descent was dizzying. Elevators of pure crystal dropped them deep into the planet's crust, the walls around them pulsing with veins of light. Zara felt Umbra press close against her legs, its form rippling with unease. As they went deeper, Zara began to feel it too, a subtle wrongness, a discord in the harmonies of crystal and shadow that made up the world around them. She glanced at Jack, seeing the concern in his eyes, and knew he sensed it as well. Their tour group emerged into a vast cavern, its walls glittering with exposed seams of crystal. Luminian miners worked tirelessly, their specialized tools carving out chunks of crystal with practiced precision. Counselor Vex launched into a rehearsed speech about the efficiency of their operations, the purity of the crystals they mined, the millennia of tradition that guided their work. But Zara was only half listening. Her attention was on Umbra, watching as tendrils of shadow stretched out, probing the cavern walls with increasing agitation. Jack must have noticed too, because he smoothly interrupted Vex's monologue. "Fascinating, Counselor. Tell me, have you noticed any unusual seismic activity recently? Any changes in the crystal formations?" Vex blinked, thrown off by the question. No, of course not. Our mining operations are perfectly stable. We have sensors." He was cut off by a low rumble that shook the cavern. Dust and small shards of crystal rained down from the ceiling. The miners stopped their work, looking around in confusion and fear. "What was that?" Jack demanded, all pretense of diplomatic niceties gone. "Counselor, I think we need to evacuate immediately." But Vex was already shaking his head, his faceted skin pale with stress. "Impossible. Our sensors show no signs of instability. This is merely a minor tremor, nothing to be concerned about. We cannot disrupt operations for..." Another rumble, louder this time. Cracks began to appear in the cavern walls, lines of darkness spreading through the crystal-like veins. And then Umbra moved. Before anyone could react, the shadow creature flowed away from Zara, expanding until it covered an entire section of the cavern wall. Its form pulsed and writhed, and suddenly, the wall it covered began to glow. Zara gasped. Through Umbra's shadowy form, she could see what lay behind the crystal facade, a network of fissures and weak points, a lattice of instability that honeycombed the entire mine. "By the suns," Vex whispered, all color draining from his face. "What is this?" "This," Jack said grimly, "is what we've been trying to tell you. Your minds are on the verge of collapse. Umbra is showing us the truth that your sensors couldn't detect." As if to emphasize his point, another tremor shook the cavern, stronger than before. Screams echoed as miners scrambled for safety. Zara stepped forward, her voice ringing out with newfound authority. "We need to evacuate now. Umbra can guide us. It can sense the safest paths out." For a moment, she thought Vex might argue. But as chunks of crystal began to fall from the ceiling, survival instinct won out over pride. "Do it," he ordered. What followed was a harrowing journey through twisting tunnels and shaking passageways. Umbra flowed ahead of the group, its shadowy tendrils probing the way forward, guiding them around dangerous fissures and away from unstable areas. Zara found herself at the heart of the action, translating Umbra's warnings, coordinating with Jack to keep the panicked Luminians moving. Despite the danger, despite the way her world was literally crumbling around her, Zara felt more alive than she had in years. As they neared the surface, a massive tremor shook the entire complex. The tunnel ahead of them collapsed in a shower of crystal shards. Screams of terror echoed through the group. But Umbra was already moving, flowing into the pile of rubble. For a moment, all was still. Then, to the astonishment of the Luminians, the shadows began to pulse and grow. The rubble shifted, lifted, and finally parted, carved away by Umbra's power to reveal a safe passage. Zara felt a surge of pride and love for her companion. "This way," she shouted, leading the group forward. Quickly, they emerged into the blinding light of day, just as a final, catastrophic tremor shook the ground. The mine entrance collapsed behind them in a plume of dust and shattered crystal. As the Luminians caught their breath, staring in shock at the destruction, Zara felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Jack, his face streaked with dust, but his green eyes bright with triumph and something else: admiration. "You did it," he said softly. "You and Umbra. You saved them all." Before Zara could respond, they were surrounded by the miners and officials they had led to safety. But instead of the fear and suspicion she was used to seeing, their faces were filled with awe and gratitude. Counselor Vex stepped forward, his usual composure shattered. He looked at Zara, then at Umbra, who had returned to its usual size and was now curled protectively around Zora's feet. We, Vex struggled to find words. "We owe you our lives. Both of you. How can we ever repay you?" Zara stood tall, feeling a lifetime of isolation and misunderstanding fall away. "Listen," she said simply. "Listen to the shadows as well as the light. Remember that there is wisdom and value in all parts of our world, even those we don't understand." As murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd, Zara felt Jack's hand slip into hers. She looked up at him, seeing a future of possibilities in his smile. The ground beneath them was still shaking, the aftershocks of a disaster narrowly averted. But for Zara, it felt like her world was only now finding its true foundation. Battle for acceptance. In the days that followed the mine collapse, Lumina City was a hive of activity and change. The near disaster had shaken the very foundations of Luminian society, forcing them to confront long-held beliefs and prejudices. Zara found herself at the center of it all, no longer an outcast, but a reluctant hero. Umbra, once feared and shunned, was now the subject of intense curiosity and study. Scientists clamored to understand its abilities, while city planners sought its help in detecting other potential weaknesses in Lumina's crystal infrastructure. But not everyone was eager to embrace this new paradigm. A vocal minority, led by some of the more conservative members of the Luminian Council, pushed back against the changes. They argued that relying on a creature of shadow went against everything Luminian society stood for, that it was a betrayal of their light-based culture. Zara stood before the Luminian High Council, Umbra a comforting presence at her side, as she made her case for a new approach to Luminian society, one that embraced balance between light and shadow. For too long, we've ignored the importance of shadow in our world, she argued, her voice strong and clear. We've pushed away anything that doesn't fit our preconceived notions of what is right and good. But in doing so, we've made ourselves vulnerable. We've lost touch with half of our world, half of our potential. Murmurs ran through the assembled council members. Some nodded in agreement, while others frowned in disapproval. An elder counselor, his crystalline skin etched with the patterns of great age, spoke up. But how can we trust the shadows? They are unpredictable, dangerous. Our society has thrived on the stability and clarity of light for millennia. Zara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history and tradition pressing against her. But then she felt a gentle touch on her arm. Jack stood beside her, his presence a silent support. Drawing strength from him, Zara continued, light and shadow are not enemies, but two halves of a whole. Umbra and creatures like it aren't dangerous because they're shadows. They're only perceived as dangerous because we don't understand them. But look at what happened in the mines. Without Umbra's abilities, without its connection to the shadow aspects of our world, we would have faced a catastrophe. She gestured to Umbra, who flowed forward, its shadowy form rippling with calm purpose. Umbra has been my companion for years. It has shown nothing but loyalty, intelligence, and a desire to help. Is that so different from the ideals we claim to uphold? The council chamber fell silent as her words sank in. Zara could see the conflict on many faces, the struggle between ingrained fear and the undeniable truth of what had happened in the mines. It was Jack who broke the silence. Stepping forward, he addressed the council with the diplomatic skill that had made him such an effective envoy. "Honored council," he began, "as an outsider, I've had the privilege of seeing your society with fresh eyes. The beauty of your crystal cities, the brilliance of your light-based technology, it's truly awe-inspiring. But I've also seen the cost of refusing to acknowledge the shadow aspects of your world." He paused, making eye contact with each council member. "On Earth, we have a saying, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. It means that to truly understand and harness the power of light, we must also understand and respect the shadow. What Zara and Umbra are proposing isn't a rejection of Luminian values. It's an evolution, a way to make your society stronger and more resilient." A younger council member leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "But how would this work in practice? We can't simply upend millennia of tradition overnight." Zara nodded, appreciating the practical question. "We start small," she said. "We begin by incorporating shadow sensing technology into our existing systems, using creatures like Umbra to help detect potential problems before they become crises. We open up restricted areas of the crystal caverns for research, learning to work with the shadow ecosystems instead of against them." She took a deep breath, knowing her next suggestion would be controversial. "And we change our education system. We teach our children about the importance of balance, the value of understanding all aspects of our world, not just the parts that shine brightest." The chamber erupted into discussion, council members arguing passionately for and against the proposals. Zara and Jack exchanged a look, knowing that this was only the beginning of a long battle for acceptance. As the debate raged on, a commotion at the entrance to the council chamber caught everyone's attention. A group of Luminian miners, still bearing the dust and scars from the near disaster, pushed their way in. Their leader, a grizzled veteran named Crix, stepped forward. "Begging the council's pardon," he said, his voice rough but determined, But we couldn't stay silent any longer. The head counselor frowned. "This is a closed session. You can't just—" "We almost died down there," Crix interrupted, his voice rising. "All your fancy sensors, all your crystal tech, and it was the shadow creature that saved us. That showed us the truth." Crix's words sent a ripple through the council chamber. The miners behind him nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. "We've worked the crystal mines all our lives," Crix continued, his voice softer now, but no less intense. "We thought we knew every facet, every glimmer. But that day in the mines, when that shadow creature, Umbra, was it, showed us what was really there." He shook his head, awe clear in his voice. "It was like seeing our world for the first time." Another miner stepped forward, her crystalline skin still bearing faint cracks from the cave-in. "My family has been miners for generations," she said. "We've always been taught that the shadows were our enemies, something to be banished with the light of the crystals. But Umbra saved my life. How can I call it an enemy?" The council members shifted uncomfortably, faced with the raw emotion and first-hand experiences of the miners. Zara felt a surge of hope. This was the voice of Lumina that needed to be heard, not just the politicians and the elite, but the ordinary people whose lives were most affected by the rigid division between light and shadow. Jack, ever the diplomat, seized the moment. "Honored Council," he said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "you have a unique opportunity here. A chance to bridge the divide between light and shadow, to create a more balanced and resilient society. The people of Lumina," he gestured to the miners, to Zara and Umbra, and to the council members themselves, "are ready for this change. The question is, are you brave enough to lead them into this new era?" A tense silence fell over the chamber. Zara held her breath, acutely aware of the weight of this moment. Everything she and Umbra had been through, all the years of isolation and misunderstanding, had led to this. Finally, the head counselor spoke, his voice thoughtful. "What you propose is a fundamental shift in our society, in our very way of life. It cannot be decided hastily." He paused, looking around the chamber, taking in the faces of his fellow council members, the determined miners, and the unlikely trio of Zara, Umbra, and Jack. "But," he continued, "neither can we ignore the evidence before us, or the voices of our people. I propose we form a special committee tasked with exploring the integration of shadow knowledge and technology into our society. This committee will include representatives from all sectors, scientists, miners, educators, and yes," he nodded to Zara, "experts in shadow-based life forms." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. A crack in the crystal facade of Luminian society that could, with time and effort, widen into real change. As the council meeting adjourned, Zara felt a whirlwind of emotions, relief, excitement, and a touch of apprehension about the challenges that lay ahead. She looked down at Umbra, who swirled contentedly around her feet, then up at Jack, whose green eyes shone with pride, and something deeper, something that made her heart skip a beat. "We did it," she breathed, scarcely able to believe it. Jack's smile was warm as he took her hand. "We've made a start," he corrected gently. "There's still a long road ahead." Zara nodded, squeezing his hand. "But we'll walk it together." "Together," Jack affirmed, and Umbra pulsed in agreement, forming a bridge of shadow between their joined hands. As they left the council chamber, stepping out into the crystal-spired city that suddenly seemed full of new possibilities, Zara realized that this was just the beginning. The real work of changing hearts and minds, of bringing balance to a world long divided, was only just beginning. But for the first time in her life, Zara didn't feel alone in facing that challenge. With Umbra's loyal presence, Jack's unwavering support, and the growing acceptance of her people, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The suns of Lumina were setting, casting long shadows that intertwined with the gleaming crystal towers. To Zara, it was no longer a conflict between light and dark, but a beautiful dance of balance. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, this was a dance worth fighting for. A new understanding. Months passed, and Luminous City transformed. The changes were subtle at first. Shadow sensing devices installed alongside traditional crystal technology. New sections in schools dedicating to teaching about the balance of light and shadow. Small shadow gardens cultivated in public spaces. Zara found herself busier than she had ever been. As the head of the newly formed Shadow Integration Committee, she spent her days mediating between traditional crystal engineers and the growing number of shadow researchers, developing new technologies that combine the best of both worlds. Umbra, once feared and misunderstood, had become something of a celebrity. Children would often stop them in the street, asking if they could pet the hero Shadow. Zara always made sure to use these moments as teaching opportunities, explaining how Umbra was intelligent and deserving of respect, not just a novelty to be gawked at. Jack, for his part, had extended his diplomatic mission indefinitely. He claimed it was because Earth was intensely interested in the technological advancements born from the light-shadow integration, but Zara suspected there were more personal reasons for his continued presence on Lumina. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were still those who resisted the changes, who clung to the old ways of fearing the shadows. Protests would sometimes erupt outside the Shadow Integration Committee's headquarters, with angry Luminians demanding a return to the purity of crystal-based society. But for every protest, there seemed to be twice as many Luminians eager to embrace the new balance. The miners, especially, had become some of their staunchest supporters, often showing up to counter-protest with signs reading, "Shadows save lives," and "Balance brings strength." It was on one such day, after dispersing yet another tense standoff between protesters and supporters, that Zara found herself walking with Jack through one of the new shadow gardens. Umbra flowed alongside them, occasionally darting off to investigate a particularly interesting patch of shade. "You know," Jack said, breaking a comfortable silence, "when I first came to Lumina, I never imagined it would lead to all this." He gestured around them, at the harmonious blend of crystal structures and shadow-infused plants. Zara smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had become increasingly familiar whenever she was around Jack. "When you first came to Lumina, I never imagined I'd be anything more than an outcast with a feared pet," she replied. "You changed everything, Jack." Jack shook his head, his green eyes serious as he turned to face her. "No, Zara. You changed everything. You and Umbra. I just gave you a little push in the right direction." They had stopped walking, standing face to face in a quiet corner of the garden. Umbra, sensing the charged moment, curled around their feet, connecting them in a gentle loop of shadow. "Jack," Zara said softly, her opalescent eyes shimmering with emotion, "I've been wanting to ask you something. Your mission here, surely it must be coming to an end soon. Earth will want you back, won't they?" A flash of something, worry, fear, crossed Jack's face. "They've been making noises about it," he admitted, "saying I've done my job, that it's time to come home." Zara felt her heart clench. The thought of Jack leaving, of facing this new world without him by her side, was almost unbearable. "And what do you think?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hands in his. "I think," he said carefully, "that home isn't always where you come from. Sometimes it's where you choose to be, where you find purpose and love." Zara's breath caught in her throat. "Jack, are you saying?" He nodded, a smile breaking across his face like a sunrise. "I'm saying that if you'll have me, I'd like to make Lumina my home. To continue this work we've started together. To be with you, Zara. You and Umbra." Joy, pure and radiant, burst through Zara like a supernova. She threw her arms around Jack, laughing and crying all at once. Umbra, caught up in the emotion, swirled around them both, enveloping them in a cocoon of warm shadow. As they stood there, embracing in the garden that represented everything they had fought for, Zura marveled at how far they had come. From an outcast and her feared companion, to the catalysts of a societal revolution. From strangers from different worlds, to partners in every sense. When they finally pulled apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "So," he said, a teasing lilt in his voice, "I take it that's a yes." Zara laughed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times, yes." Umbra pulsed happily around them, and Zara felt a surge of love for her faithful companion. "And what do you think, Umbra?" she asked, ready to make Jack a permanent part of our family. In response, Umbra flowed up, forming a shadowy halo around Jack's head like a crown. Jack laughed, reaching up to pat the shadow creature affectionately. "I'll take that as approval," he said, as they walked hand in hand out of the garden. Umbra flowing beside them, Zara looked out over Luminous City. The crystal spires still gleamed in the sunlight, but now they were complemented by swirls of shadow, creating a breathtaking interplay of light and dark. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to face, minds to change, technologies to develop. But looking at Jack, feeling Umbra's comforting presence, Zara knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. In the end, it hadn't been about a girl and her terrifying pet, or about a human who wasn't afraid. It had been about understanding, about seeing the value in what others feared. It had been about love, love between individuals, love for one's people, love for the complex, beautiful world they all shared. As the 3 suns of Lumina began to set, casting long shadows that danced with the crystal light, Zara, Jack, and Umbra made their way home. Not to the isolated dwelling on the outskirts where Zara had once hidden away, but to a new home in the heart of the city. A home that, like Lumina itself, embraced both light and shadow, a symbol of the balance they had fought so hard to achieve. And as night fell, bringing with it a tapestry of stars reflected in every crystal surface, Zara knew that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet.